I am head of sector for climate policy in the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development, and I'm dealing with climate change issues for 25 years. I got a task to start to deal with climate change in 1997, and till 2006 I was the only one person dealing beside my boss that was partially working on these issues. And since then we being capacitated, and also it should be mentioned that, for example, in 2004 in Air Protection Act we had 4 articles related to climate change, and at the moment we've got separate act with 134 articles. So it is something that evolved over the time, and I'm sure that will be in your countries as well. Next slide, please. So Croatia is obliged to monitor and report on the greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement and the relevant decisions of the Conference of the Parties. Actually, this year was the last one that we reported in accordance of the Kyoto Protocol. Parties are required to develop, regularly update, publish, and report to the Conference of the Parties national inventories of anthropogenic emissions by sources and removals by sinks of all GHG emissions using comparable methodologies agreed by the Conference of the Parties. And GHG inventories are key to enabling the tracking of the progress with the implementation of the decarbonization measures. In EU legislation, as we've heard, these requirements regulated by the governance regulation. And in Croatia legislation, it is incorporated into law on climate change and ozone layer protection, and also regulation on the monitoring of greenhouse gas emissions policies and mitigation measures in the Republic of Croatia. For the functioning of the reporting system, it is also important decision on the establishment of the Committee for Intersectorial Coordination for a national system for monitoring greenhouse gases. Next slide, please. Climate change laws regulates which reports are prepared, and we've heard from Isabella that are lots of them, and whom they are delivered and according to the which methodology. But as a first step, for the preparation of the inventory, it is important to have reliable, consistent, and accurate data. And therefore, Article 25 of our Climate Act stipulates that public bodies competent for activities related to the environmental protection, the economy, agriculture, forestry, water management, sea transport, official statistic, as well as the company's Croatian forests and Croatian waters, which collect and or hold data on activities according to the sector in which GHG emissions are occurring or removed, and which data are required for producing this report, should deliver such data to the ministry on yearly basis, free of charge, taking into consideration deadlines, the scope and format published by the ministry on its website. Those bodies are also obliged to participate in all phases of data preparation and data submission, report review, and also revision carried out by the UNFCCC Secretariat and the EU team expert. Next slide. And one more, and then we will go back, please. Next slide. Yes. By decision 18 CMA, modalities, procedure, and guidelines for the transparency framework for action and support referred in Article 13 of the Paris Agreement have been adopted, and Annex 2B 18 requires that each party should implement and maintain national inventory arrangements, including institutional, legal, and procedural arrangements for the continued estimation, compilation, and timely reporting of national inventory reports in accordance with modalities, procedure, and guidelines, as we call now MPGs. National inventory arrangements can vary by party depending on their national circumstances and preferences, and change and evolve over time. In the EU legislation, this requirement is incorporated in the governance regulation, and in Croatia, institutional arrangement for inventory preparation is regulated in Part 2 of the regulation on monitoring of greenhouse gases emissions in Croatia. So now we can go back on this previous slide, please. So this regulation establishes a national system for the estimation of reporting of GHG emissions by sources and removals by sinks, the list of greenhouse gases, roles of all institutions and other involved stakeholders, method of calculating greenhouse gas emissions, deadlines for producing and submitting the reports to the UNCC, Secretariat and European Commission, way of verifying reports and methods, and also review of GHG inventory. Next slide, please. Yeah. The ministry is a national focal point for the UNEC and Paris Agreement, and the central national authority responsible for maintaining of a national system. It is responsible for communication with the UNCC, EU, control of methodology for emission and greenhouse gas removal calculation, approval of the inventory before submission, and submission to the European Commission, UNCC, etc. Next slide, please. Institute for Environment and Nature in the Ministry is responsible for organization of the GHG inventory preparation, collection of data, development of the quality assurance quality control plan, archiving of all documents used for inventory planning and preparation, QA, QC procedure, and selection of authorized institution. The preparation of the inventory itself is entrusted, it's outsourced, and it is entrusted to authorized institution, which is elected for 3 years period by public tendering. And so far, it is Economic Institute for Environment and Energy. Next slide, please. It is very important that in all institutions responsible for emission sectors and sinks, there are experts who are familiar with the requirement for inventory and who can clarify during the revision the data they provide in terms of consistency, collection method, accuracy. It is also important that they can guarantee that the same data provided for NIR is provided for other purposes as well, because it happened in early stage of the preparation of our inventory that revision team would find different data that were used for the preparation of the inventory that we had in our inventory, those one in FAO basis. So we had found out who sent it, both of collection of data, and explained those differences. So now we strive to avoid any such problems. Therefore, in 2014, we established Committee for Intersectorial Coordination for a National System for monitoring greenhouse gases. Members of the committee are experts from institutions listed here. Next slide, please. And here, of course, Croatian Bureau of Statistics is main source of data. Next slide, please. The task is annual preparation and submission of data from the sector needed for the preparation of the inventory. They control reliability, consistency, and transparency of data from the sector. Review the calculation of greenhouse gas emission from the sector, especially participate during the review and help to answer on the questions of the experts of the UNCC and European Commission. Next slide, please. So for the preparation of the inventory, we use revised UNCC reporting guidelines and 2006 IPCC guidelines and refinement from 2019. And also from 2024, all parties of the Paris Agreement would need to use modalities, procedure, and guidelines, MPGs, and the report for the period 1990 till 2020 in accordance with the enhanced transparency framework adopted in Glasgow. That is different from the rules under the Kyoto Protocol and convention so far, where we had separate requirements for developed and developing countries. Still, the developed countries would need to submit its inventory on annual basis, but now developing countries would need to use all these methodologies and CRF, but they can use flexibility and use possibility to and help for increasing of the capacity till they will be able to report in full extent. Next slide, please. For reporting of indirect GHG emissions, we use data from the emission inventory report prepared for the LRTAP convention. And methodology applied to estimate emission includes activity data, for example, fuel consumption, salmon production, wood stock increment, and associated emission factors. Of course, in order to follow a higher tier, we strive to develop and use control country-specific emission factors. If available, it is recommended and should be based on the well-documented research that we are undertaking. Next slide, please. The National Inventory Report contains detailed descriptive and numerical information on all inventory and national arrangements, data, national circumstances that we should be explaining in the specific details. Also, all changes that happen from previous one submission. And common reporting format, CRF tables, contain all greenhouse gases emissions and removals and implied emission factors and activity data. Next slide, please. Institute for Environment and Nature in the Ministry, that actually used to be agency outside of the ministry, is responsible for collection of data. Main document for data collection is annual data collection plan that is made for each sector, that contains source categories, activity data, data source, and competent authority. And this plan is prepared by the authorized institution, but in collaboration with the committee and the ministry, and is published on the official website of our ministry. Next slide, please. After collecting data, colleagues in the Institute are checking consistency and completeness, and in case that something is missing, they contact institution that provided that data and ask for explanation or additional data, and then send all data to authorized institution for the preparation of the inventory. Next slide, please. Regulation on the monitoring of greenhouse gas emission and policies and measures stipulates that Institute for Environment and Nature in the ministry is responsible also for development of the QA/QC plan and implementation of the QA/QC activities. They have to archive all documents and that are used for inventory planning, because they are then asked to be shown during the in-country review. Procedure starts with preparation of a QA/QC plan that is made for each inventory year. It contains activities, responsibilities, time frame. Next slide, please. So here you can see print screen of those documents. Next slide, please. So you can imagine we have quite a lot of work to do in relation of the preparation of the inventory. As we deal with two inventories actually in 1 year. One we submit to the Commission, first CRF in January, and then in a complete national inventory report in March, then to the UNCC in April. Our inventory first would be revised by the Commission and then by the UNCC revision team. On two occasions in February and September, we are answering on lots of questions from the revision team of experts. In parallel, we are collecting data for NIR that we prepare and that will be submitted next year. Next slide, please. And here are results. Inventory is needed for the planning of mitigation policies and measures. So in 2020, emissions in Croatia were 24.33% below emissions in 1990 without LULUCF. Next slide, please. As I already mentioned, inventory subject of review. Croatia has undergone 17 UNCC reviews so far, 4 in-country review. It is quite very, substantial review. And centralized reviews. Issues then recommended by the ERT have been included in next inventory report as far as possible. Next slide, please. Actually, inventory development is never-ending process. Improving is imperative. Improvement plan is a tool for controlling development process and optimization of the resources. Next slide, please. So it is how those tables looks like. Plan contains sector of CRF codes, name of the improvement, type of issue, sources of reference, description of the improvement, responsibility, and planet NIR where these improvements will be incorporated. Next slide, please. In the last few years, we put a lot of efforts in order to improve LULUCF sector data and decrease uncertainty, since we try to find policies and measures for enhancement of the SINC and to improve projections. And the reason is that in near future, Commission will already this year propose certification system in order to encourage increasing of the forests and such policies and measures that would increase SINC. So for that, you have to have very, very reliable data, since these removal units will have price. So as a very important project, I would like to mention CROLIS, under which we are establishing substantial Croatian land use information system. Also, we have projects by which we will increase our accuracy and in projections. Also, we are establishing a system for the harvest wood products tracing and try to improve our modeling related to the dead wood. Next slide, please. So as I said, for many years, we are improving our national system. So we've done a lot. Strengths are that we have all arrangement in place. and establish this committee that I mentioned. Also very important, we've got financial means for necessary researches, and we use auctioning revenues from the emission trading scheme. Authorized institution is selected for 3 years period by public tender. Maybe would be better to have a longer period. And we established very, very good cooperation with research institutions. And now we are undertaking contacts with faculties, asking them to give students for their master of PhD thesis researches that are needed for the improvement of the inventory. But of course, we've got weakness, and that is insufficient number of experts in public institutions, frequent changes of experts in public institutions, and especially problematic is a long period needed for obtaining of necessary knowledge to be inventory experts.